People have this concept about Christians that everything that they believe it's just because the Bible says it. And that might be technically true. I believe a lot of the things that I believe morally because it's what God tells me in the Bible that I believe is completely reliable. And what I have today in my hands, my Bible, is the Word of God. I absolutely believe that. However, a lot of people believe that my conclusions are just because of what this piece of paper says. And there is no good reason for those conclusions or for the instruction that is found in the Bible. I'm Marco Arroyo. Welcome back to In Between Sundays. I'm glad you're here. Also, while you're here, if you would consider liking the video, leaving a comment, let me know what you think about this, and subscribing to the channel. I very much so would appreciate it. And consider supporting the Patreon. Love you. Basically, what I'm trying to say is a lot of people say, well, Marco, you only have these views because this book tells you, but those views are not good for society. They're not good at all. They're just what this old book is telling you, basically. And one of the biggest places where this bears out is in the area of marriage and in relationships, in these long-term romantic relationships, that there is no secular argument for the biblical institution of marriage, which is one man, one woman for life. That's, in short, God's design for marriage. So before we get into some good arguments, secular arguments against gay marriage and primarily for God's institution of marriage being what is respected and what is practiced, I want to show you an example of a terrible argument against gay marriage or for the institution of marriage as we read about it in the Bible. It's actually by someone who does things that I enjoy sometimes. It's a guy by the name of Matt Walsh on Joe Rogan's podcast, giving his argument on why he disagrees with gay marriage on a secular level. Notice what he says.
The advocates for what we call now traditional marriage, which I just call marriage, but the advocates for traditional marriage put themselves at a disadvantage by especially in the churches, like allowing this rampant divorce to occur. And then you've already sort of given up on some marriage is supposed to be monogamous and permanent, as well as procreative. Well, you've given up monogamy and permanence, and so now it's not. That's two of the three legs gone. And so now this assault was waged on the procreative part of it, and it was difficult to withstand it because the institution had already been weakened. So I agree with you there. But my answer to that is to try to reinforce what marriage is, not to just give up on it entirely. And I still think you're left with this question of, like, if marriage is not what I'm saying it is, then why do we even need it? What's the point? I mean, you're saying it's a man-made institution.
Yes.
But you're also, like, the way that you're presenting it, it's a totally meaningless institution.
No.
So they don't need it at all.
No, it's not meaningless. It's because it means something to the people that get married.
So real quick, basically Matt Walsh's argument is it's about the definition of the institution. It's about the definition of marriage, which is, what he said. It's this monogamous, procreative relationship, essentially. And so it's, and also one thing that he puts in there, it's people of the opposite sex. Obviously, that's part of his argumentation here. It's just not in this clip. And so what he's saying basically is if you start to distort what the institution's definition is and other people get married who don't fit that definition for whatever reason it might be, then he goes, and what's the point of the institution at all then? The institution itself becomes meaningless if people don't enter into the institution the way the institution was originally set out and defined. But this argument absolutely falls flat, and Joe Rogan's actually going to point this out.
It doesn't always work. And so I don't think it should be outlawed because 50% of the people fall apart. Just like I don't think it has any effect whatsoever on a straight couple if a gay couple decides that they want to make it official.
Okay, so notice this. Joe Rogan just pointed out this contradiction. He goes, I don't think we should outlaw it just because half of the people who are part of this institution don't do it the right way in the sense that they divorce. It's supposed to be a lifelong commitment, as Matt Walsh said. And so he goes, we allow just rampant divorce now. That's what Matt Walsh was saying. And so therefore, we're making the institution meaningless. And Joe Rogan says, I don't think it should be outlawed because a bunch of people divorce. Because I think it should be allowed for whoever wants to get married because, again, they want to get married. I don't think it should be outlawed just because a lot of people divorce. Let the institution be, and if not everyone goes into the institution in the right way, then that's their life, that's their business, essentially.
It codifies and protects and gives a name to a thing that actually exists, which are man, woman couples creating people, creating babies.
But not always.
Right, but that's still the nature of the union. So,
but what are the percentage of people today that are married that don't have children? I bet it's pretty high amongst heterosexuals.
Probably.
Is there something wrong with that?
I think there is something wrong with that. I think there is something wrong with, getting married and saying, we're not going to have any kids at all.
But why is there something wrong with that if someone's personal choice?
They're able to make that choice, but I think you're still rejecting one of the purposes of marriage. And in the scenario that you just outlined, you're also deciding to live a really self-centered life. You're saying.
So here's the problem with his argument. He is more than willing to say, no, people should not be allowed to be participating in this institution of marriage if they are of the same sex. And he says it's because of the definition of marriage. But then when Joe Rogan says, well, what about married couples who choose not to have children? And he goes, yeah, well, I think that is incorrect. I think they're making the wrong choice. But he's not against them being allowed to participate in the institution of marriage. You notice that? He goes, I think it's a good thing if you have kids. I think that they should be, he says at one point, they should be open to life, having children. But again, it's not the end of the world for him. And it doesn't destroy absolutely everything the way it would with a same-sex couple. And the reason why that is a problematic argument is because he's inconsistent. These factors, they all should be equal when it comes to keeping the institution of marriage, the definition intact, but they're not in the way that he puts this into practice in his arguments. Now, I stumbled upon this video, and they actually make excellent arguments, the secular argument for this institution of marriage, and it's not based off of definition. It is based off of function, and I'll explain what that means in just a second here.
Even if we were to take Kahn's view of ethics and remove God from it and go to the moral imperative, if everyone did said thing, what would happen? If everyone... right now, what is it? Gen Zers, 1 out of 5 are identifying as a part of the LGBTQ community. Right. So if 1 out of 5 identify, and then that number keeps increasing, it's doubled every generation. What is the logical conclusion of that?
That's Bill Maher said.
The Bill Maher said.
By 2060, we'll all be gay.
well, and then what happens to the basic ability to recreate and maintain our population or exceed our population, which we see what happens when there's not a growing population. Look at China. Look at Korea, right?
Sure.
They can't support their own infrastructure, right? So even if we just think about it logically, this stuff doesn't make sense.
Well, that's why.
Okay, so he's saying from the start, first argument is if this continues to grow and grow and grow and be more and more and more and more popular, it's going to be literally bad for the health and the productivity of society. Again, a fully secular argument. It's going to be bad. It's going to have bad consequences for the way this looks like in society if more and more people, which is what's happening, there's a huge spike of people who are participating in relationships that don't rear children and don't have this solid nuclear family. A huge spike in people. He said 1 in 5 of Gen Z identify this way. And so if that continues, it's not going to be good for how society functions in the future. That's one of the secular arguments. Let's see what else they have to say.
In the book, Correct Not Politically Correct, I asked people to consider just 2 questions, and here are the 2 questions. What would happen to society if everyone lived faithfully in natural marriage, marriage between a man and a woman? Well, just think about it. Child abuse would go down. Obviously, divorce would go down. You'd have more families together, so you'd have parents in the home, dads in the home, which is huge. You'd have lower taxes because the government wouldn't need to bloat itself to try and make up for the broken family. You'd have so many things that would be better in society. Next question. What would happen if everyone lived faithfully in same-sex marriage? It would be the end of civilization in a generation or 2.
That's right.
Now, I'm not suggesting that having a law that allows same-sex marriage would cause this. I'm simply pointing out that there is a difference between the 2 relationships.
Okay, so let me stop there for a second. You notice that, and this is the best way to argue this secularly, and I fully believe this. Notice what he's saying. If you allow people of the same sex to get married, I don't think it's going to, again, I don't think the whole world will just disappear in a generation or something like that. What they were arguing earlier was if everyone participated in this relationship, we'd be gone, right? We'd be gone very, very quickly. Allowing people of the same sex to get married today it's not going to produce that outcome so quickly, right? And I don't think it'll ever be the case that everybody is going to turn that way. Everyone is going to identify that way at some point, and then just no more kids and society, humanity just dies off. That's not going to happen, okay? That is crazy talk to say that's going to happen. Notice what he says. It's not the definition of the institution when we're arguing secularly. It is the function of the institution. It is better for society when the relationships are this way, when they are traditional families, nuclear, husband, wife, monogamy, rearing children. It is better that way. That is the best way. Notice what he says. Whether or not you make a law for allowing people of the same sex to get married, he goes, I don't think it's going to change a whole lot, but we can argue that one is far better than the other.
These two relationships are not equal. They're different qualitatively because one perpetuates and stabilizes society and the other does not.
And this is actually a point that Ben Shapiro has made many times.
I wanted to ask about gay marriage, which I didn't think we properly duked out earlier. You may disagree, but I felt your argument for the secular side of opposing gay marriage was that you feel the state sort of advantages marriage because it's a useful thing for society. I find that very odd because I don't feel that that's why we have rights and freedoms in society. If we're being utilitarian in the US, a lot of our rights make governance harder. So thinking of the First Amendment, that makes societal harmony a lot harder. The Second Amendment makes saving lives a lot harder. Shouldn't secular debate on gay marriage be focused mostly on the pursuit of happiness over what's useful?
So again, I'm going to hone in on the definition of rights in what you're saying. So when I say right to gay marriage, as I expressed earlier, I think that you have a right to go down to your local church and have anybody sign any document that you want. What you're actually talking about is a government benefit. When the government says that it sanctifies a marriage, that comes along with certain legal procedures. Otherwise, I don't think the government should be in the business at all. Let me make that clear. If it's just about getting a government piece of paper that says magically your marriage is now sanctified by a bunch of politicians, it makes no difference to me. I have two marriage documents in my possession. One is my religious marriage document, which I actually care about, and then I have the secular marriage document, which I don't even remember the date of and is buried somewhere in the garage. I don't care about it at all because I don't rely on the state to sanctify my personal relationships. And frankly, I think if you do rely on the state to sanctify your personal relationships, you need better relationships and you need better institutions. Again, politicians and bureaucrats giving you a piece of paper should not make you feel better about your relationship. The whole purpose of the debate over gay marriage should have been over whether certain forms of marriage are beneficial to the state or not, because it's about the benefits that accrue. I think that it actually morphed into something else because there was an attempt, I think, by some people to suggest that because the state hits a stamp on a piece of paper, this grants quote-unquote moral credibility to the thing. I'm not in favor of the state being the arbiter of moral credibility on personal relationships in general. I don't think that that's the state's business. I do think that it's the state's business to incentivize or disincentivize particular types of behavior. And in this case, I don't think it's the state's business to disincentivize particular types of sexual relationship. But I do think that it's very much in the state's interest to incentivize particular types of familial relationships.
So Ben Shapiro's basic argument here is this, and it's very simple, and I think this is where we all can come together on this, or many more people can come together at least, maybe not all of us, because again, there's going to be people that are for it no matter what anyone will say. It's not about, he thinks that everyone should be able to get married in any way that they want, essentially. And obviously there's limits to that, children, whatever, right? There's obviously limits. But this is when it comes to same-sex marriage. If you're of the same sex, you want to get married and your church will do it, then okay, whatever, do it. You live in a free country where you can do that. However, what the government should subsidize, what the government should incentivize is not those relationships, but it should be the most powerful kind of institution of the family that there is, which is one man, one woman, monogamous for life, rearing children. Just on an objective secular level, that is the very, very best that can be offered for this country. I don't really care what Greg Abbott, I'm in Texas, thinks about my marriage. I don't go, oh, I hope I'm living up to Greg Abbott's standards for what he thinks my moral job is in this marriage. I don't really care. I don't really care what Joe Biden thinks about the sanctity, the morality of my marriage. I care about what my God says about my marriage. But what Greg Abbott and Joe Biden have a responsibility to do, in my view, is incentivize the nuclear institution of marriage, the nuclear family, the institution of marriage, one man and one woman, monogamous for life with the rearing of children, objectively, that is the very best way to have relationships. God bless you. I'm glad you're here. Let me know in the comments, is this reasonable? Is this unreasonable? I'm interested to hear your thoughts. I'll talk to you soon. Take care. Goodbye.